Imagine a serial killer is stalking your city. Now, imagine he offers everyone a chance to live, but only if you follow one pretty bizarre command. Well, that is the real and still unsolved story of the Axeman of New Orleans. So back in March of 1919, a letter just like this lands at newspapers all across New Orleans. The person writing this made one thing crystal clear. They weren't just some criminal. No, they claimed to be something far, far more terrifying. A claim that would absolutely haunt the entire city. So what did this demon actually want? It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. No, the demand was something that could really only happen in one place on Earth. New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz. The killer's ultimatum was, well, simple. He promised to stalk the city on a specific night, but offered this really strange form of mercy. He would spare any house that was playing jazz music. Can you even imagine that? Your life literally depending on your playlist for the night? And how did the city respond? They didn't hide under their beds. No way. They did exactly what the Axeman demanded. The entire city basically turned into one massive concert. Every single venue was packed. People were playing records in their homes. Pianos were being hammered. The night was just filled with music, like a citywide shield against a monster. And the result of this citywide jazz festival? On that promised night of terror, the number of people killed by the Axeman was 0. Not a single person. He actually kept his word. The music, as crazy as it sounds, it worked. But this incredible night of music, it wasn't some big party. It was an act of pure desperation, and it was born from a long, brutal reign of terror. To really get why they danced, we have to understand just how scared they were. Okay, so let's rewind. The year is 1918, and New Orleans, it's already a city on the absolute edge. The Great War had just ended, leaving its scar on the world. The Spanish flu pandemic was carrying through the city, killing thousands. And right in the middle of all this anxiety and death, a new kind of predator steps onto the scene, one who seemed to be specifically targeting Italian immigrant families. It all started back in May of 1918 with Joseph and Catherine Maggio. The attacks kept happening, on and off, for over a year, and with each one, the city's dread just grew and grew. This all led up to that infamous letter in March 1919, with the final known attack happening that October. What made the Axeman so terrifying wasn't just the violence. It was the chilling consistency of his method. He was like a phantom, this unseen attacker with a very specific, and honestly, super disturbing, calling card. Okay, so check this out. His method was always the same. First, he'd chisel a panel out of a back door, just big enough to slip through. Then, and this is wild, he never brought his own weapon. He used an axe he found inside the victim's home. Afterwards, he'd just leave the axe right there at the scene, but he'd wipe it clean of any fingerprints. It was so brazen and meticulous at the same time, it left the police with almost nothing to go on. So with no witnesses, no real forensics, and no clear motive, the investigation just fell into total chaos. The case of Rosie Cortzamilia is a perfect example of this mess. She was a survivor of a brutal attack that killed her young daughter. At first, she accused her neighbors. They were convicted. But then, she took it all back. By the time they were freed, so much precious time had been lost, and the real Axeman was still out there. Then, all of a sudden, the attacks just stopped. Late 1919, and just as the city was starting to breathe a sigh of relief, something dramatic happens hundreds of miles away in Los Angeles, and it gives them the first real potential suspect in the whole case. Remember Mike Pepitone, the Axeman's last known victim? Well, just 1 month after he was murdered, his widow tracks down this guy, a man named Joseph Mumfree, all the way in Los Angeles, and she shoots him dead right there in the street, screaming that he was the man who killed her husband. I mean, talk about vigilante justice. But was she right? Was this guy really the Axeman? Let's break it down. On one hand, the case for him being the guy is pretty compelling. A victim's widow identified him, he had a criminal record, and get this, the gaps between the attacks perfectly matched up with his time in prison. But then you look at the case against him. He was never officially charged, and there was zero physical evidence that ever linked him to any of the crimes. It's interesting for sure, but it's all just circumstantial. And so, just like that, the case remains officially unsolved. The attack stopped. Mumfree was dead. And what we're left with is this incredible legend, a story of absolute terror, and the strange, lasting legacy of a killer's one single night of mercy. So this leaves us with the one central, haunting question. Was Joseph Mumfree really the Axeman, brought to his own kind of justice by a grieving widow? Or did the real killer just disappear, fade away, leaving behind nothing but this bizarre legacy, the night New Orleans literally played jazz to survive?